Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. I actually have gotten quite a few new subscribers recently. I don't know how y'all are finding me because I have not been consistent at all about making content, but I'm here with another recent reads video for you. I'm going to talk about the last 5 books that I have read. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the first book that I want to talk about is Edward and Amelia by Karen Thornell. This is a historical romance, and this was very lovely and very sweet. I gave this book 4 stars. And the basic premise of this book is we have Amelia, who is the daughter of a duke, and she has some pretty severe physical scarring on her body, so she dresses in a way that is seen as unfashionable at the time, like with very high necks, and she doesn't let anyone at all see her. And so because of the way she dresses, she unfortunately has kind of gotten a little bit of a side eye in society, so she's not necessarily seen as like a diamond of the first water at all. And she is actually several seasons deep, and she's just decided that she's not going to marry. Nobody's going to want her. She is really afraid of showing her body to anyone else because she's so self-conscious of those scars. But her father, however, who is the Duke, is like, no, listen, you got to get married, and this is the season, this is the time, this is it, you must get married. So she proceeds to go out into society for her season, and she ends up running into, quite literally, Edward, who is an earl, and he also is sort of in this situation where, okay, I must marry. He's got a reputation for being like king of the rakes. He is quite a rake, but now he's like, okay, I gotta settle down and marry. And not only is he like a rake, but as sort of comes with the territory, like he's quite a bit of a flirt. It's very interesting how this book shows the way he engages with other women and how that affects Amelia, because of course the two of them get married. They end up in this situation where they find each other outside. She literally like bumps into him and he pushes her into like this pond, and they're caught together when he's trying to rescue her out in a very compromising situation, although literally nothing happened, but they are forced to marry. So I really liked the setup of that. I thought it was really cute and very clever, and I thought it was just really very fun, and I love the writing in this book. I have to say, I have been so impressed with the quality of writing from a lot of these closed-door historical romances that I've read. Like, I think the quality of the writing is quite high, and that is something that is very important to me, and so I've been really absolutely thrilled to see that and just think it's fabulous. So I have been super excited that so many of them have been such high quality writing. Like, this book reads quite slowly, like it's a very slow paced book where we're getting very gradual reveals of how the two of them feel together, because they do get married so early on. The rest of the book is really focused on them building any type of a relationship, and Edward, who is a rake, he's never really had any type of a friendly relationship with anybody, and so he finds himself really starting to care for her and having all these feelings for her that he's not quite sure what to do with. Very classic historical romance trope in that way, where we have the rake who has these feelings that aren't just obviously like wanting her physically, and he's like, I don't know what to do with myself, and of course it must be love. But it's very, very sweet, and I also really liked how this book focused on some of the smaller details of a relationship that may cause a little bit of problems, or that may cause a little bit of insecurity on the part of each other, just basically with the setup of Amelia, who is so like self-conscious of her body and things like that. And then we have Edward, who is such a flirt and is very complimentary to other women, and that really is a source of pain for Amelia, because anytime that he has complimented her in the beginning, she really like took it to heart, and she's like, wow, he really must think of me like that. And then when he hears her, or she hears him compliment another woman, she starts to realize the depth of what it is to be a rake, and how does he just flirt with everyone like that? Did it mean nothing what he said to me? And I just thought that was so fresh and unique, and something that we typically don't see. I think in a lot of times we tend to run to the extreme in the relationship, like, oh, he touched her, he kissed her, they did something, and that's the cause of any type of insecurity, or maybe even a little bit of jealousy. And I really, really liked how here it wasn't that at all. It was the fact that she had started to trust him and trust in his feelings for her, and then she has this moment of awareness where she is learning how he has behaved with other women and how he's flirted with them and complimented them, and so all of those feelings that were starting to build kind of crumbled, and he has to work to prove to her that he actually did really mean that, and sort of come to grips with the way that he had been so flirtatious. So I really liked this a lot. I thought this was very unique, and even though it is such a very familiar story, I felt like it was told in a unique way. It is very slow moving, very slow building relationship, and again, the only reason that this really isn't a 5-star for me is that I definitely felt like we didn't quite get enough romantic moments, like deeply romantic, that would make me believe that they fell in love, because again, this is another case of where he is like, oh, I love her, and it just seemed to happen like far too quickly, you know? So I would have liked a little bit, even though it was like a slow paced book and we get little insights here and there, a lot of them were not necessarily focused on the realization of their feelings, and that's something that I really, really love in historical romance, especially any type of romance, is when they both, but specifically the hero, when he has that realization moment of, I love her, and he's realizing why and what it is about her that has made him love her, and he's sort of like coming to terms with love for the first time. Like, I just love that so much. So I didn't feel like we got quite enough of that. Like, when he realized he loved her, it sort of seemed to happen just very quickly, and we weren't really in his head for a lot of the revelation that he was having of, oh, I love her actually, and this is why, you know? So, but I did really like it. I thought it was very sweet and just really fun and good. So 4 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was also a really great one, and it is The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. So now, I actually have never read Catherine Center before, mostly because, like, I've heard of her, obviously, but mostly because I feel like she's often shelved in, like, women's fiction, or people, you know, say that she's women's fiction. And a lot of times that's not really what I'm wanting if I want a romance, but I heard some really good things about this author from my friend Lindy on Instagram, and I think I heard specifically that, like, the banter was really good. And so I put a bunch of her books on hold at my library, the audiobooks, and then as they came, this is the only one that has come in so far. Like, obviously she's a very popular author. So I snatched it up and listened to it, and I just absolutely loved it. Like, I was captivated by this book. I really wanted to keep listening to it. When I wasn't listening to it, it really swept me away. I loved the voice of this. I thought the voice of it was really stunning, very engaging, really, really great banter. Like, I think a lot of times banter is something that can have a lot of subjectivity around it, because what one person finds really beautiful and romantic, even though that's not technically banter, another person will find cheesy or cringy, and what somebody finds to be great banter, another person will be like, eye roll, cringe, you know? Like, and so that's sort of where I feel like I find myself when someone says this has great banter. And I'm just sort of like, are we serious? Because I actually have my next book. We're going to talk about that with the banter that I thought was just so dumb, just so freaking stupid. So this book, however, I felt like it had great banter, really, really great. They had great chemistry. They had such a great friendship. I really liked the way they fell in love. I do think this definitely is women's fiction with romance as like a subplot of that, but I didn't mind. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really fun read, and I did give it 4 stars. Let me tell you, again, the basic premise, I forgot to do that. So the basic premise of this is we have Hannah, who is, the blurb says that she's like basically the size, she looks like a kindergarten teacher, like she looks very friendly, unassuming, kind of small, but she is actually a bodyguard, and she does a lot of like the logistical stuff of being a bodyguard, so like planning like where everybody's going to be and how to help them be safe, like things that they do when they're out in public. Like, it's really pretty cool how she does that, but she's also very capable and is able to like disarm and take people to the ground if need be. So I love that she is this like big, powerful, intelligent woman, but she's also like just sort of small and unassuming and looks like a kindergarten teacher. So I really liked that about her. So she ends up, in the beginning, we find that she has just lost her mother, and she just broke up with her boyfriend, and she is very bereft, and so the only thing that she really has is this job that she loves and adores and that means a lot to her. She gets put on assignment to go, I think it's to Texas, maybe? I can't actually remember. To bodyguard this Hollywood heartthrob named Jack. He is essentially the heartthrob. Like, everybody thinks that he is, you know, the Brad Pitt of the times. Brad Pitt was the heartthrob when I was a teenager. Anyway, so they end up going to his parents' like farm or ranch because his mother has cancer and they don't know how much time she's going to have left. So he hires these bodyguards because he has a stalker who is after him, like a female stalker, and he, you know, doesn't really want to deal with that, but he also wants to go and see his parents, and he doesn't want the stalker to like follow him and find him. But he also doesn't want his parents to know that he has a bodyguard. He doesn't want them to know about the stalker. So Hannah and Jack enter into this like fake dating relationship where she poses as like his girlfriend, and it's just fun. This book has so many tropes, but it never felt tropey. It never felt like it was written for the tropes. They felt like they really were natural in here, a natural part of the story, a natural way for the characters to, you know, have situations to be together. Like, this was trope filled, but it felt very natural and organic, and I loved that. So I just, again, I was very, very impressed with the writing of this. I really loved the voice of both the characters and the author. I think it's very sharp and very witty, but it also has moments where it's really able to be very heartfelt, and I loved that too. So I did give this one 4 stars, and again, the main reason I didn't give it 5 stars is just because it didn't, like, for a book to be really like 5 stars for me, it really has to either bowl me over with the romance or the cleverness of like the plot or the storytelling or the world building, or something has to like hit me deep in my feels. And this one didn't. It was really fun and I really enjoyed it, but it didn't like get me like in my feels, you know? So that's why both of those are 4 stars. Like, I would still recommend them as solid reads. They were very entertaining and very fun, but they left a little bit to be desired when it came to like impacting how I felt. So okay, the next book that I read is A Dawn of Onyx by Kate Golden. So this one I gave 3 stars. This is a book that has been on my radar for quite a while. I saw a few friends in the romance booktube community reading this early in the year, I believe when it was first published. And then I recently saw that it was picked up by a mainstream publisher, I think maybe Penguin. And I don't know why, I just, like, this specific book, well, I was in the mood for a fantasy romance. Like, I was definitely in the mood for fantasy romance, and this book just kept, like, coming to my attention. So I grabbed the audiobook, and I listened to it, and I do think the audiobook was actually really, really great. That was a good way to go for me, because the narrator did a really good job of performing this, and even though this says it has dual narrators, the male narrator only, in the audiobook, only does, like, a bonus chapter from the male's point of view. So it's not a dual narration, and I really hate how they keep doing that. They keep saying this is dual narration, but then like one of the narrators only gets like this tiny part at the end, and I'm like, I really wish that you would not do that. But anyhoozles. So this book, I gave this book 3 stars, and at first I was really into this book. Like, I feel like, okay, the basic premise is we have our heroine named Arwen. And this book is a really simple world where you have like different kingdoms based around like gemstones, and so Onyx is the kingdom that is like evil, and I felt like that was just a little too on the nose, you know. But she is from, I believe, the kingdom of Amber, and she is a healer, and she has these magical abilities that she can use to enhance her healing. And so the book begins with her healing someone in her community, and she's trying to use just her natural healing abilities that she has learned and practiced, and when she sees that she's not going to be able to save him with that alone, then she taps into her magic. And I just thought that was such a unique and really well done scene. It really hooked me, it really gripped me, it gave me a good sense of the characters and a good sense of the world without being info dumpy. I think that this book was not really info dumpy at all, and in the beginning that really worked to get me hooked into it, because I had a good basic understanding of the world where, okay, war is happening, we're in this kingdom that is not like the bad kingdom, and people are injured and they're dying, and we have our heroine who is a healer, and she's trying to use her natural abilities, but then she had to use a little bit of her like magical abilities, and I was just like, this is interesting, I'm here for this. I think this could go somewhere really, really great. So the beginning really hooked me, because I love, and I can be very, very critical of books that rely too much on info dumping at the beginning, and books that don't give you a good feel for the characters, and I feel like that this book did that really, really well, because we had our inciting incident where she's doing healing. It lets us know a little bit about the world, all we really need to know at the beginning, right? And not only that, but it also is moving the story along quickly. So all of that was good. However, once we got to maybe like a third of the way into this, to I guess like the middle third of this, really suffered. It really, really was like, I want to say it was dragging, but I don't really feel like that's accurate, because it just felt like very little was happening and we were getting more info dumping. But again, we didn't really have an in-depth feel of this world. It felt like the world was structured in a way that was very basic, and so when we would have moments of info dumping, I just sort of felt like, but you're not really telling me anything about the world greater as a whole. This is just sort of like taking up page space or giving the characters a reason to be together, you know? So, but then again, the last third really sort of picked up. I liked the reveals, I liked how it ended, and that's ultimately why I gave this book 3 stars, because it had a really strong beginning for me, and the ending was also pretty good, but that middle was just kind of it was just a mess. There was stuff in there that was really inessential, that really slowed down the whole pace of the book, that made me feel like I didn't desperately need to keep listening to find out what was happening. There was nothing really compelling me to keep reading this. And I think that is largely because a large portion of the middle is our heroine engaging with our love interest, who she meets as a fellow prisoner because, you know, other events happen after she's healing that man, where she's taken into to be a prisoner of the Onyx kingdom, and she's sort of held there against her will so she can heal the king's warriors and soldiers and things like that. So, a very interesting premise, but the middle just really, really lagged, because we get a little revelation of who the love interest is and what his plans are in the greater world, and it started to feel like very, very predictable, and also something that just felt very derivative. Like, I feel like I have read iterations of the story so much, even down to the dialogue, which again, I feel like some people may say this has really good banter and really good dialogue, but for me, it really did not. It felt very cheesy, very cringy. Like, the whole time that he's flirting with her, it just felt very much like, I see that you are hot and I like that. But like, I just hate that so much. It just feels like, again, I feel like what could have been a really good, really interesting book and story handled in a sensitive way, once we get into something where nothing about the world or story is happening, we go to the go-to response for a lot of these TikTok fantasy romance authors, which is the low-hanging fruit of physical attraction and desire. And I want there to be physical attraction between my characters, my love interests. I absolutely do. I want there to be physical attraction. But I get so freaking tired of it when that is literally like the only thing, and they're saying things that sort of make me like roll my eyes, and I'm like, I feel like this is like such a tired, just got a message. I feel like this is such a tired and overdone way to try and develop tension in the romance, or try to show that they're flirting. And to me, it feels very weak and very short-sighted, and it just is like, okay. Like, it literally feels like some guy coming into your DMs with like some type of compliment about how you look, and you're supposed to just be like wowed, and I'm just sort of like, are you expecting me to be impressed? Like, come on. Like, it reminds me of, if you've seen those TikTok, this whole book reminds me, the relationship, the romance in here really reminds me of like those TikToks or memes that you see where it says, he says, I love you, but like another person said, speak her name over my grave and watch how she brings me back to life. Like, that is what I want. And what I'm getting is like the very basic, you're beautiful. Like, I love, you know. So, yeah. This one was disappointing. Far too predictable, far too samey. I feel like I've read this a million times before, and I feel like it was especially disappointing because of how unique and strong I felt like the beginning was. So, the writing in here was very serviceable for me. I didn't feel like it was necessarily good or bad. It was just a vehicle for me to get the story, and that's all I wanted. So, the writing was solid for me. I say solid, the writing was serviceable. That's better. Okay, so I finished this on audio, and I was doing a lot of cooking. Like, I read this while I was getting ready for Thanksgiving, and I'm like, I need something else to read, and I wasn't sure what to read, so I went through my Audible library, and I saw that I only had an hour left of The Raven Boys, which is a reread for me. This is one of my most reread series. I've read it so many times. I love and adore Maggie Stiefvater. I've talked about her multiple times. I just love this book specifically. I love the world. I love the characters. I love the tension and the slow building romance. I love the devastation and the angst of what could happen if this romance happens. Like, I just love it. I love how it's a little bit mysterious and dark, and things are fully explained, but they also are definitely not. There's a lot of mystery surrounding this. I love the found family aspect. I love how the characters feel so real. I love how this book is full of themes, but they are never once didactic or hitting you over the head. They're there for the reader to unravel. When I finished this book, and especially because I read it off of the heels of A Dawn of Onyx, I just literally felt like The Raven Boys is top tier fantasy romance, and it's a YA book. And even though the romance takes several books to finally come to fruition, the tension that is building between these two is so beautifully well done, and I just adore it. I think that it taps into those emotions of falling in love so well, whereas I feel like A Dawn of Onyx really fell short for me, and it was just sort of like, you're hot, let's go in the back room. And I'm just sort of like, boring, gag, roll my eyes, whatever. So The Raven Boys was a fantastic reading experience. I loved it. That, you know, whenever that end of year book tag comes around, there's a question on there that's like, do you have an autumnal book to transition into? And I always, that question always like gets me, because I'm like, that's a weird question. But if I did have a book, it would be this one, because I almost always reread this book in the fall, because I just love the vibes. I love the way it feels. I just love everything about it. So it was great. 6 stars. That's a 6-star book for me. That book is something that I want more of. I want more of that feeling. You know, I would love to see that in an adult fantasy and an adult fantasy romance. But I kind of feel like some of these top tier YA fantasy / romance authors, I just feel like I don't know if those feelings would transfer into an adult book, because a lot of what makes them so compelling is that it's first love. It's that realization of, I have feelings for this person I've never had before. So I don't know. Anyway, it's beautiful. And it was so well done. It just had me kind of laughing about A Dawn of Onyx, because I'm like, that was a fail. Am I going to read the next one in A Dawn of Onyx? Probably. Anyway, next book that I read, the last book I want to talk about, is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. So because we are approaching the end of the year, I kind of want to finish all of the books, maybe not all, because I have really started and stopped a lot of books this year. I do that a lot. If I'm just not feeling it, if I'm just not vibing with it, I will start and stop. But Swordcatcher is one I really wanted to finish. So since I was already in a fantasy mood, I decided to go ahead and pick it up and try it again, because in a previous video I did talk about, like, I was pausing it because I was having a hard time getting into it. That continued to persist throughout the whole book. So this, honestly, is one of my most disappointing books of the year, because I am such a huge Cassandra Clare fan. I love her Shadowhunter books. I love them. I love them so much. I think they are so good. A lot of those books, again, are books that have every single thing that I want. An angsty romance, a very clever, solid world, great characters who you really can feel for, and also a very intriguing plot. Like, they have everything that I want. And that sort of nebulous element of something that just makes me feel. Sometimes it makes me ache. It makes me think about things. Something that just makes me feel for these characters. Like, Maggie Stiefvater and Cassandra Clare both do that really well for me. Some Cassandra Clare's are misses, but most of hers really work for me. So I was so excited for her first adult book. I was so excited / nervous for her first book outside of the Shadowhunter world. And I think that maybe because it is the first book in a series, and she was really striving to make this feel adult, and I do think she succeeds in that. This does feel very adult, as far as, like, the writing quality feels like it's more dense, it's more detailed. There are things to really think about in here that I think would definitely slow down a YA type of audience book. But I do also feel like a lot of the stuff that she talks about in here was just sort of, like, inessential. A lot of it we didn't really need to know, and I kept thinking, like, when are we going to get to what's actually happening in this book? Because when you read the blurb, it tells you basically the gist of what this plot is, but then when you actually read it, it just sort of feels like there are a lot of things. We're going here, we're going there, we're following this character here, this character comes in here, but none of it is really connecting. And even though there were moments in this book where I felt like, okay, I'm invested now, I like where this is going, then it would just, like, almost abruptly drop off. And we would again sort of just look at things that were inessential to the story. And it gave me that feeling of when an author is writing a fantasy book, maybe, like, for the first time, a new fantasy world, a lot of that book will feel almost like an exploratory draft, because the author is writing it so they know about it, you know? But the reader doesn't need to know all of that, and certainly not all at once, you know? I mean, that's one reason why I am so picky about world building, is because I'm like, you have to get the reader invested in the world. You need to let them know what is happening in this world, what the setup is, but it needs to be done in a way that really helps the reader to get invested in the character and the story. And if it is only world building, if it is only, like, info dumping, that's a history book, that's a text. That is not a fictional story, and I get so frustrated about that, and I can be very harsh about it. But I also just felt really kept at a distance from these characters, and that's something else that I think Cassandra Clare does so well, is her characters. She's such a good character writer, where she really can get to the meat of what makes a character tick, what their fears are, what their pain is, what they want most, and then she manipulates that throughout the story so that you are feeling all of these things along with the character. And a lot of times that revolves around some element of forbidden love. Cassandra Clare does forbidden love, like, it's just like such a beautiful thing. And so because I heard that this book had an element of forbidden love and it was adult, I was like, she's going to take that concept and she's going to really expand on it. So I definitely was expecting an element of forbidden love in here, but there really is not. There's literally the beauty and the romance and the depth of emotion and feeling in her Shadowhunter books, which while technically YA, I feel like a lot of them do not feel young adult at all. Like very similar to how the Raven Boys doesn't feel like it's written for a young audience. They feel very mature to hit like an older demographic of YA. But this book, it just didn't have that. It didn't have any of that. I felt like I knew the characters on paper, but I didn't know them enough to really care about them or to really care about the stakes. That's another thing. Like this book, even though some of the stakes were told to us that they were very high, it never ever felt like the stakes were high. And so even though we have all of this happening to our characters or the potential of things happening, I was sort of just left like, this doesn't feel dangerous. This doesn't feel like the world is ending. This doesn't feel like our character's world is ending. And that's something else that I think Cassandra does really good in her Shadowhunter books, is that she makes it feel like what is happening to this character will destroy their world. And like, I live for that type of angst, you know? So I gave it 3 stars. There were parts of this book that are definitely a 2-star. But again, this book is very well written. It's very interesting the way that it's written, in that it's technically really good, but it lacks a lot of heart. And that's what I read for. I don't just want, but contrary to popular opinion or what I know some people have said about me, I'm not just here for technicalities. Like, I need it to be technically good so I can feel what the author is trying to get across. I think some authors can really try to get feeling, but they get hung up on technical skills that will catch up some readers. But this book just felt like it was really technically well done, but it was lacking heart, and I hate that. So, I know, I didn't tell you what this book was about. Honestly, like, this book is so long and very little happens. There is very little momentum in the plot of this book, and momentum in the characters. But the basic gist, we have 2 characters that look very similar. And Kel was an orphan, and he was rescued from the orphanage, taken to live in the kingdom to be the prince's body double, the prince's name is Connor. So they grew up together. Kel thus becomes the sword catcher because his entire role in life is to be a body double for the prince and to die for him if necessary, so that the prince doesn't die. Meanwhile, we have our woman character, Lynn, who is, I think it's an Ashkari. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's one of the Ashkari people, and they are one of the few people who still have magic, and she's a physician. So she ends up going out and healing people in the town, and she ends up trying to save Kel during a failed assassination attempt, and that's when they sort of cross paths. There is also like this, there are 2 sort of like crime lords of the city. One is called the Rag Picker King, and the other one, I can't even remember his name. And the Rag Picker King sort of gets these 2. He's going to promise them what they want most if they help him get something. So the overall plot setup is there. And I love the concept of a sword catcher and like a body double. Like, I think that could be really interesting with a really great character dynamics and relationships, and how they have this friendship that's always sort of fraught with this tension of, well, you're going to have to die for me. Like, I think that could be really well done, but I don't feel like we explored any of that. Very disappointing, because like, what is the point of having this as a plot device if you're not going to establish that there's a lot of complexity and feelings here, you know? It was disappointing. It read very slowly. It was way too long, and there was just not enough happening. There was not enough happening in the characters' lives. There was not enough happening in the story. There was a lot of world building, but it just also felt like inessential. So this was disappointing. I feel like 3 stars is quite generous. And mostly it's 3 stars because I think the concept is great and it's technically so good. So, alright, there you have it. Those are the books that I have read. Thank you so much for watching this video and for making it this far. If you have made it this far and you're still watching, please feel free to leave me a Christmas tree or some type of Christmas emoji, because pretty soon. It's going to be December. Today, as I'm filming this, it's the day after Thanksgiving. So hopefully, if I can find it when I'm editing, you're going to have my Christmas intro and outro. So thanks, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see y'all in my next one.